All right, the XFL ratings are out, so we'll chew into those. Breaking news there, Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. We do it live on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. My friend and yours, Johnny Max in the house for Football at 4 at JF McMullen. He appears via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. We got a lot of NFL to get into, including some breaking news earlier today, John. I don't know the level of surprise here, but the Eagles have released linebacker Nigel Bradham. The move creates $4.5 million in cap space. He's been here since 2016. Really has been the one linebacker that has been in the lineup, kind of the one proven guy they've had over the years. I don't know that you could say his play has remained at the same level, but this is a guy that was going to be 31 years old when the season opened, and the Eagles are pretty thin without him at linebacker. So first off, how does the move help them, and then where does that leave them?
Well, it is a need position, but I think it was a need position before this decision was made. And it's not a surprise. Most people assume they would be moving on from Nigel, how his contract. You remember the headlines, that 5-year, $40 million extension, which was laughable on paper. You saw it was essentially a team option every year. And as the salary started to rise, you knew they were going to either go back and adjust if Nigel played well or move on if he didn't play well. I don't think that he played poorly by any stretch of the imagination, but he wasn't great either. So they needed to get better at that position. And also, I think the thing people are missing, and this happened twice, and you go all the way back to the preseason, and I put this on 973ESPN.com. He did that weird no-show, no-call for the final preseason game with the Jets. Just didn't show up for the bus. Now, he wasn't going to play as a starter. Well, you got to let your bosses know you're sick. He said he was sick at the time. Just didn't show up. Mm-hmm. And then in November, when he hurt his ankle and he was out for 4 games, he missed a rehab appointment and did not call and did not explain it. And there were some people in the Eagles organization who actually advocated at that time to release Nigel Bradham because of these issues. So when you put that on top of it, on top of the middling play, I think it was a pretty easy decision for the Eagles. But certainly they now have to fill essentially 2 holes at the linebacker position. I mean, this is a team that plays nickel predominantly like most teams in the NFL. So unless you're really, really comfortable with Nate Gerry, which I know this fan base is not, but certainly the coaching staff thinks more of Nate Gerry than the fan base. Still, it's a really, really weak position as we sit and stand today. The good news is Eagles don't have to play today, so you still have free agency. You still have the draft. There are many ways to improve at that position.
Well, one is Kameu, who's a free agent as well. Does this strengthen his opportunity to come back, or do they just clear the cupboard here and go with a completely new linebacker look?
Yeah, I don't think Kameu's coming back as well. Similar reasons as
save for missing the bus.
Well, he didn't miss the bus, but he did the concussion thing.
Yes.
When he hid the concussion, the Eagles made a big deal about him playing the entire game and essentially lying to the coaching staff and the training staff, which I don't think is fair, to be honest. I mean, I think behind the scenes, Kameu will get lauded for his toughness, but we know how you have to act in public-facing entities from a PR standpoint with that particular issue. So that was one. And the second part is Kameu also did not play very well. I think there was hope that he was going to take a big step forward. It was having a solid training camp, but then remember he got hurt, sprained his MCL, missed a number of weeks, and when he came back, he wasn't the same player. So I do think he's going to leave as an unrestricted free agent. And, yeah, you're going to clear the decks, and basically all you have left in-house is Nate Gerry, TJ Edwards, Duke Riley and Alex Singleton. So
yeah,
you
and
need
I
multiple
gotta
bodies at linebacker.
yeah, and I want to ask you. There are some intriguing names on the free agent market. I can't imagine they invest any money on a free agent to play that position, though, right?
Well, they rarely do. I mean, you look at Nigel Bradham is sort of that level of player. They don't value that position. They don't like to allocate a lot of money to that position. And it's understandable. It's not as important. We've talked about the devaluation of running backs on the offensive side, linebackers on the defensive side, because of the changes in the game, the evolution of the game. And then you add into the fact that the Eagles are a 4-3, traditional 4-3 team. Now, they play multiple fronts and all that, but you see edge linebackers, essentially edge players, they get paid a lot because they're pass rushers. But as far as natural linebackers, which is what the Eagles are looking for, you generally don't want to pay those guys a lot. It's fair to say.
Yeah, there's no question that linebacker is going to be an interesting story now with Bradham and Kameu, both guys who took a lot of snaps for the Eagles last year. And really, Nate Geary is the guy returning right now that would be the top of the depth chart. So that's a position of need, no question. We know wide receiver. We know secondary. You could throw linebacker into the mix. I guess, backup quarterback's going to be another spot they got to do something with, right?
Yeah, I mean, they have a decision to make there, no question. They didn't believe in Nate Sudfeld enough last year, and they went out and convinced Josh McCown to come out of retirement. So it's pretty evident that they didn't think Nate Sudfeld was ready to be the backup quarterback in this league. So it's hard to imagine after a year of being a third stringer where he hasn't really done anything, that they all of a sudden feel very comfortable and bring him back to be the backup quarterback. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of holes on this team, and I think it's natural at this time of year in the NFL. Fans start to say, well, who are we going to get to replace Nigel Bradham? Who are we going to get to replace so-and-so? Everybody's in this position. Everybody's got to make these decisions, and that's what the offseason is about.
Yeah.
And the Eagles have to fill these holes, and essentially that will tell their tale as how good they will be next season.
Johnny Mac football at 4. So we saw it last week with the Redskins. Norman, Paul Richardson, getting rid of some of the fat. The Eagles started today. Are there other veterans who maybe don't want to pick up their cell phones the next couple of days? Are there other guys who could be, these off-season cap casualties the way they're, the contracts are structured?
Well, the Eagles are actually in a pretty good position compared to most teams, obviously. They don't have a ton of what they've had essentially over the past 2 years prior. Because of all the maneuvering, all the losing of the draft picks, certainly going all in. This is the first time in a number of years they've had a little bit of wiggle room. They came into this with just over $40 million in cap money, which sounds like a lot, but I think it's 18th or 19th in the NFL. So, but it's enough room to maneuver. You're adding 4.5 for Nigel Bradham on top of that now, so you have a little bit more money. So they don't have to do a lot of things, but the two most notable decisions they have to make are Jason Peters and Malcolm Jenkins. I mean, Malcolm has said he's not going to come back under his current contract, and he played last season. He's on record as saying he doesn't want to play next season under the terms of his current deal. So something's got to give on that front, and you would think it would be from the Eagles' standpoint. They've gone as far as they can go, and they either have to make them happy or they have to move on. And then Jason Peters, are the Eagles comfortable enough with Andre Dillard to put him in at left tackle? You drafted him in the first round. That would be the natural progression, but we all know Jeffrey Lurie's relationship with Jason Peters, what Jason Peters means to this organization. So those are two difficult decisions the Eagles have to make.
All right, John, let's get into some of the other football news. I say football news because this is non-NFL related, but the XFL ratings have just been released, and they're not that bad, actually. Very strong ratings in week 1. They were good ratings in week number 2. They were significantly better than the AAF's ratings for week number 2. They averaged 2.2 million viewers. They peaked at 3.3 million. The average ratings for week 2 in the AAF was half that, if not more. They averaged 1 million on TNT and 425,000 on the NFL Network. So the XFL's ratings significantly better than the AAF. What did you think of week 2, and what do those numbers tell you?
Well, I think the numbers are decent. I wouldn't say they're great. They had to be better than the AAF because the platforms are much better. So they're not on TNT. They're not on the NFL Network, which few people watch, especially on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. I do think they're hurt by the move. One of the games was on FS1 this week, so when that happens, they will be hurt a little bit because no one has sort of latched on to FS1 as counter programming to ESPN in the sports world. So those games will take it down a little bit. So I think you have to focus on the ABC, ESPN, and the Fox games. And as long as they hold up and do relatively well, I think it's a very positive sign. And to date, they've done so. I think we've talked a lot about the off-the-field stuff. I think it was great. I think it continues to be great. The transparency with the officials, I think, is tremendous. Kickoff, we talked about. I'm not in love with the late game stoppage of the clock to try to encourage comebacks. I think that's a little bit too gimmicky. I hope they scale back on that. But, we talk about good quarterback play versus bad quarterback play. And the games that have had bad quarterback play, they've been bad. They've been bad aesthetically from an entertainment standpoint. But, I pointed out on a different show, on a national show, Mike, people act like the NFL doesn't have bad quarterback play. I mean, the bad quarterbacks in the NFL, those games are ugly too. And so I'm a little surprised people are surprised that when the quarterback is not playing well, that the product is not going to look great. I mean, that's common sense.
Yeah, no, yes, you're right about that. But the bad quarterback play in the XFL is even magnified because of the fact that, the product around it isn't as good to help them out, right? I mean, in the NFL, you might get a bad quarterback. They do some things.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, obviously they're better players, but I mean,
I don't think it's. Do you think okay, you compare the ratings to last year's or the AAF from last year, and they're obviously better. You mentioned one's on broadcast cable, the other one was on FS1, which you're right has not really caught on. But the fact that it didn't drop off so significant from week 1 to week 2, because we talked about it last week. If they lose half their audience, that's a bad sign. They dipped a little bit. Now, they changed the times a little bit. The first week it was, 2 and 5. This week it was 3 and 6. I don't know why they did that, but, I thought it was a good sign. Now, the 2 games on Saturday I thought were bad games.
Good sign as well.
I thought the 2 games Saturday were bad games, John, and I thought the 2 games Sunday were entertaining.
Well, yeah, and I think if you look at it, Cardell Jones has played well, and P.J. Walker has played well. The kid from Ole Miss, I keep forgetting his name, from St. Louis has played well. Landry Jones, I don't think played well, but he hasn't played in such a long time. He's coming back from his injury. I think you could see he's a level above most of the XFL quarterbacks, so I think he'll be okay as well. So that's half the league right now that's got decent quarterback play to above average quarterback play. And then, I'll tell you this is where the XFL has an advantage, and what have you. I don't know what you want to compare it to, because whether it's reality television, because Major League Baseball has actually used that term, and everybody wants to cultivate these viewers that I often talk about don't exist. You talk about that New York game with Matt McMullen, who was just terrible on the football field. But the behind-the-scenes stuff, that was compelling.
Mm-hmm.
That was compelling television. You saw a starting quarterback melt down because of how poorly he performed. Now, that's the reason why the NFL doesn't want you behind the curtain, because these types of things happen when people get frustrated. And he's out there, and he's the optimistic, typical quarterback one at the beginning of the game, and then he's just terrible, and he's calling it the worst game plan. We got to change everything. In the second half, he's throwing his coaches under the bus. He's throwing his teammates under the bus. Then he gets benched, and he's talking live. I mean, that was, as I said, it might be a train wreck, but that is compelling stuff. And you're saying, well, the game is ugly. But the fact that they have that ability to interview players who are frustrated and showing those frustrations,
right?
That's interesting. It is to me, at least.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And also, real quick, on the betting side, both DraftKings and FanDuel said they experienced bigger betting volume in Week 2 of the XFL than the opening week. FanDuel says the handle was up 45% week over week. So, there's a sign, too, that the bettor is now saying, you know what, I'm going to peek in on this game. I got more information. I'll throw a couple shekels down.
Yeah, I expect that. I mean, I think bettors are fueled by information, and there was such little information going into the season. I mean, nobody knew what was going to be what. You can talk about it. You can say, well, Cardell Jones was this coming out of Ohio State, or Cameron Artis-Payne was an NFL running back, but these teams never played before. They haven't played together before. They didn't have an exhibition season. They all practiced down in Houston. Nobody knew what it was going to be, and if you are a bettor, it's pretty dumb to lay down bets when you have no information. So I felt pretty consistently.
Nobody cares about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as the information starts and people get to see it and people actually get tangible information, yeah, I think they'll be willing to put a little bit more money down.
What do you think of the punt rule?
I like it. I like anything that encourages the play to come in. I don't necessarily like the coffin corner aspect of it. I mean, I think that part of it is, I mean, that's really hard to do. And if a punter is skilled enough to pin you back inside the 5 with a coffin corner thing, he should be rewarded for that.
Mm-hmm.
And, touchbacks, I have no problem because essentially what that does is encourages you to go on fourth down a little bit more when you're on the plus side, because if you're going to get a touchback, it's going to come out to where 35, I think.
Yeah, if you punt the ball, this is for the listeners out there who don't know what I'm talking about, they have a go zone. It's to discourage coaches from punting when they're in this go zone between the 40-yard lines. They want you to try to go for it. If you punt it, any punt that goes out of bounds or into the end zone is spotted at the 35-yard line, a rule that will discourage attempts to pin opponents near the goal line.
Yeah, and like I said, I like it from the touchback aspect. I don't like it from the coffin corner aspect, as I said, because that's a skilled play from a punter, and you're taking that out of their arsenal. But, yeah, I have no problem. I mean, if you're at the 40-yard line and you're going to punt the ball and it's going to come back out to the 35, yeah, it's going to encourage you to go for it, and that makes things more exciting.
All right, so the XFL, the ratings staying strong. They didn't drop off the face of the earth, which means people were enjoying it. The games were definitely better on Sunday than they were on Saturday, but you could say that maybe some of the better players played on Saturday, which led to some of the inequity in the actual games. Because Cardinal. Now, here's a question. An NFL team, they're putting their rosters together now. If somebody calls Jones, can he just up and leave?
No, but he can up and leave after the season, and that's fine because the season essentially ends in April, late April.
It's the week of the draft.
Time.
It's the week, the championship game. I don't know if it's the $1 million game, which it was the first incarnation of the XFL. I don't know what they're calling it, but
just the XFL championship game.
All right, well, that was Tommy Maddox, your MVP of that first one, by the way. So if you play the full season, you're going to draft weekend, and then, I mean, is there like that's going to be the interesting part. Like, is there like going to be, I don't want to say a battle, but let's say 4 or 5 teams all of a sudden want to sign Cardell Jones based on his 3 or 4 weeks now. He's kind of stuck in the situation.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily stuck. I think it's helping him. I think he's the perfect example of who this league is helping because that's a position you need live reps. You're not going to gain much being the 4th quarterback on an off-season roster. Remember, you're not doing anything. If you're signed to a futures deal in the NFL right now, the new league year doesn't start till March 18th. The draft, as you mentioned, late April. Mini camps don't get underway until after the draft in early May. So you can sign right out of the XFL, go into an NFL off-season program, and they're going to think more highly of you. And the same thing happened with the AAF. There was a run on AAF players for off-season rosters. And, yeah, it was a underreported market because they're not high-profile players, but there are a number of players that had multiple suitors. And I expect the same thing to happen with the best players in the XFL.
All right, a couple more for football for Johnny Max in the house. The Eagles, Adam Schefter reporting the Lions have spoken to multiple teams about a potential trade for Darius Slay. Now, the Eagles were in on Slay reportedly at the deadline last year, despite Detroit's outlandish requests. And in the past, he has said he wanted to stay with the Lions. Now he is kind of suggesting that he would welcome a fresh start. So would the Eagles be back in on Slay in the offseason?
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles, that's another position they need multiple bodies at, most likely, depending what goes on in free agency with their own guys. You expect Ronald Darby to go. If Jalen Mills also leaves, that means you have to replace 2 starters. I don't think there's any confidence in Rasul Douglas or Sidney Jones at this point to be starting level players. Then you have Avonte Maddox and Cre'Von LeBlanc who can handle the slot, but they're not really outside corners. So they're certainly going to add a couple bodies at that position. They have needed a true cornerback 1 for a very long time, and that's what Darius Slay is. But you saw that one report, I think it was Sidney Jones in a 3rd-round pick. The Lions aren't taking that. This is a really good player. It would start to me at a 2nd-round pick, maybe even a late 1st-round pick. And then on the back end, you also have to redo the deal. And he expects to be, if not the highest paid corner in football, certainly amongst the top 2 or 3. So you're talking about significant assets as far as draft picks and maybe 15 to 17 million. So that makes it very, very difficult for a trade. But from a football standpoint, he would be a huge upgrade. Yeah,
and we do know that 4-time Pro Bowler Chris Harris is also going to be a free agent, and he says he thinks that the Broncos are going to let him walk. Now, he's 31, so could be a trickier situation there. Also, Drew Brees announced via Instagram he is going to return with the Saints in 2020, which means Teddy Bridgewater looks like he will go, and there's expected to be a strong market for him, John, being reported that somebody might be willing to pay him around $30 million a year.
Well, I don't know if I believe that. Remember, the cap is going up, and that's the going rate for starting quarterbacks. But you also have to find a match, and there are a lot of quarterbacks available. If you look at free agency, a little bit more available than usual. Plus, in the draft, obviously, you have certainly a team like Cincinnati is going to go Joe Burrow, so you know you can cross them off the list, and then you start going down it. People are already starting to marry Indianapolis with Phillip Rivers. We talked about Tampa with Phillip Rivers, and they have to make a decision on Jameis Winston. Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill. The Raiders, clearly, John Gruden, no matter what he says, doesn't want to move forward with Derek Carr, and they've been linked to Tom Brady. The Chargers with Cam Newton. All of a sudden, okay, who else? So I think Teddy Bridgewater is a starting quarterback in this league, but $30 million? I don't know if I'd go that deep with him.
All right, he's John McMullen. He also finished first in Philly Voice's Battle of the Face-Off questions. Number 1 ranked. Congratulations.
Yeah, I thank Jimmy Kempski. I don't know if they're scientific, those ratings. But I joke, that just means I'm the biggest you-know-what of a bunch of you-know-what.
Well, we hope you're back to defend your title as the number 1 face-off question reporter in the Eagles beat. That was up against, 14 other reporters, 17.
That is 25. 25 deep. This is Philly. That's 25 deep.
He's John McMullen.
And that doesn't even count the columnists. So it's really about 35 deep.
Jeez. Well, I've been watching the Amazon Prime All In, and I've been seeing the back of your head in some of these things here, and I'm thinking, my God, this room is packed with people.
Yeah, it's awful.
All right, John McMullen, at JF McMullen, Football at 4. We do it again tomorrow, and we got plenty more topics I never got to today, but we'll hit on them tomorrow. All right, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, John McMullen, like all guests, appear to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.